Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Will you fasten your seatbelts for takeoff, please? Thank you.
Kia ora, hello, and welcome to Sound Salad, where we toss around all things spoken and all things heard. Brought to you by Audiobooks New Zealand, New Zealand's leading producer of audio content.
We hope that you will have a pleasant journey, and if we can add to your comfort in any way, please do not hesitate to press the call bell.
Hello, and welcome back to Sound Salad. I'm here on a kind of crisp and chilly grey Friday evening, actually, coming to you live from the wardrobe. And I'm actually, luckily, interviewing my first ever narrator for the show. So we will be speaking today with an amazing New Zealand actor and musical director and vocal mimic and, I mean, you know, a million and one things, but pianist. You know, he's just incredible. The musically adroit Paul Barrett. So it'll be interesting to hear what your idea is about the role of the narrator in bringing stories to life for the mainly auditory audience. So, Paul, without further ado, how's your Friday night going?
Good, thank you. I'm sitting here with a glass of wine. I was recording today. I was recording this morning at the Blind Foundation.
Yeah.
I'm currently doing a book, and like most actors, and probably like most voice actors, we're whores, right? We find it very hard to say no. We'll say yes to anything.
Yeah, well, we have to, right?
As long as no animals and children are harmed, I'll say yes to anything. In terms of the books that are given to me, they're just
sure.
You know, and I've gone recently from a book on the story of the history of Mount Eden Prison to a new book on Māori cuisine, modern cuisine, called Hiakai.
Yeah, that's right.
And the name of that restaurant in Wellington.
Yeah.
And now I'm doing one on the history of the New Zealand garden from a Māori and Pākehā perspective, from the 19th century to the present day. And I'm really
wow, Is that a recent publication, that one?
Yes, it is, with lots of pictures of people in their gardens in the 1960s and 70s, for example, you know.
Yeah.
And I go, oh, look at that. And, you know, and people dressed as I remember us dressing at the time and the period, and I get a little misty-eyed. I don't know why.
Oh, I do love it. I do love it. I do love a good old non-fiction, eh? So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey as a performer, as a vocal performer, and then maybe how that all kind of led you into the audiobook world, I suppose, being a narrator?
Well, I guess I can say this, that I was, you know, obviously had a talent, and one can admit to that, because I had no say in the matter any more than brown eyes and male pattern baldness. So I was gifted with a good pair of ears, you know, and music and any sort of sounds, voices fascinated me right from the start. My brother found an old reel-to-reel tape, which he transferred to CD or something a few years ago, rummaging around in a box from our parents, and who are both long gone. And it was recording made when I was on a neighbour's big, heavy reel-to-reel tape recorder in about the early 60s, when I was 4 or 5. And on it, there's my mother prompting me to sing. And I sang, I had a little nutmeg, I had a little nut tree, nothing would it bear, but a little nutmeg and a golden pear. And I thought, gosh, I have no memory of this myself, but I was really struck and quite pleased that my intonation was so good. I remember later music exploding in me when I was in my more like 10, 11, 12, but I hadn't quite recalled how far back my sort of the musical instinct was there. Anyway, and I had this funny little English accent, because although I was born here, I was born of my 2 brothers, younger brothers, and I were born of English immigrant parents.
Yes.
And we went back for a year for some reason. And when I came back, I attribute the voice I have now as a 64-year-old to whatever I picked up when I was back in England as a 3-year-old. Not when I was back, when I went to England as a 3-year-old. Because when we came back to New Zealand, I had this sort of rather funny hybrid voice, which I've never lost. It's not an affectation. The sort of accent I have, which a lot of people have mistaken for English, But it's not. It's something I picked up, even my young years at that age, and I never lost. I mean, I just mentioned that as an example of I just seem to be acquisitive orally.
Yes.
I would just pick up people's voices, whether I...
You were quite adept at vocal mimicry, right? To the point where it sometimes got you in trouble a few times.
Oh, yes, of course. At that age, back especially, so I'm at primary school in the 60s.
Yeah.
And
when that sort of thing would have been seen as
Exactly. Well, any sort of thing like that was seen as just disruptive show-off. And I have the school reports. Mum kept our school reports and she showed them to us when we were adults. And there it was, exhibitionism, and Paul must stop showing off in class and attracting the attention of others and all that.
I love it.
Of course, for a young performer, I'm sure other people who were performers too. We were just practicing. Our instinct was, how can I engage an audience? And, that was all we had to work with at that age. But of course, it was just simply seen as show-off, disruptive, exhibitionistic behavior that must be, reprimanded or preferably stamped out. But,
sure. So then throughout all of that, and despite all of that, you somehow made it onto the sort of theatre circuit. And around that time, there was Mercury Theatre, there was the actual capacity for actors to train and work at the same time, or to at least hone and really refine their craft while also being able to pay their rent with what it is that they're doing. I feel like there's a real richness in learning that way, that even if you've gone to drama school now, I don't think that it would ever really be the same. I personally don't think that the industry will ever be the same here again anyway. I mean, how many years ago was it that you were really kind of, getting on that bandwagon of doing the tours and doing the rep and that kind of thing?
Well, of course, remember the very first drama school. Well, the first professional theatres in this country. The first was Downstage in '64, but I was still at primary school then. And then the one and only drama school, as Toi Whakaari, as it's now known, was the New Zealand Drama School. That didn't come into existence till the mid-'70s. I was a teen, and in the '70s, and I certainly applied for it myself. I didn't even get an audition. I was absolutely crushed I auditioned as soon as I left secondary school, and I just assumed this would be the only way into the profession. And I didn't even get an audition, and I'll never know why. I'd been acting in amateur theatre since I was 13, which was the earliest age you could act in most amateur theatres. This was near Wellington. And I joined every amateur drama society in Wellington and up the Kapiti coast, so I could back to back from the age of 13.
Yeah. And if that's not drama school, I don't know what is.
No, well, the thing is, of course, the generation older than us, that was their drama school because there was no choice. And so even for mine, but that's because, as I say, because Toi Whakaari, the one and only, there are thousands now. Everyone opens a drama school these days. Thousands. God. There was the only one, so it had huge kudos and huge status, and everyone wanted to be in that one. And so to not get it was deeply crushing. And so I just switched and thought, oh well, I'll go to university and do a music degree instead. That being my other gift, my other area of passionate interest. It still involved sound, of course. Happily I had both these loves and both these gifts, a musical one and one for the voice. I didn't study piano performance. I was learning piano privately. I took to the piano like a duck to water. I've been learning that privately since about 15. I think I started formal lessons just for a few years. But at university, I studied music history and music theory and composition, because some of the leading composers in this country all seem to be at Victoria University. Douglas Lilburn, the great Douglas himself, for a year, and Jenny MacLeod and the late Jack Boddy and Ross Harris. It was a wonderful, exciting place to be. Yeah, so, and then
So was it through the musical sort of study school peeps that you met, that kind of thing?
Into the theatre. No, I tell you what it was. As I say, I was doing amateur theatre, but, of course, in those days, there was still radio drama.
Yes.
as a
Yeah,
radio plays, not just single solitary reading like we do at the Blind Foundation, that there is the money for now on RNZ. There were actually plays where a group of people came into a studio and did a play, stood around microphones, plural, and there was a person doing all the sound effects. Remember all that?
Yes, all the Foley.
The Foley, somebody on the Foley table doing as the actor said, I'm just going to walk to my car. Somebody was on that little strip of going, come.
Oh, yes.
Shutting the door and even striking the match as one lit one cigarette or whatever it was. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
So they did auditions twice a year to take in any new voices. And I auditioned for that. And I've been listening to radio plays since I was in the 60s. My parents bought me a transistor radio, which I'd lie in bed and listen to at night and sort of fell asleep to. Probably too adult, but I was just obsessed with the sound of voices, of course. So, I mean, I would listen to adult stuff, but no, as well as the children's request session, children's stories, which were a huge influence too, because they often included, of course, very funny voices, character voices, character-full voices.
Yeah, and, which we don't often get a chance to do, really, do we?
Yeah, the little tune that got away and Tubby the Tuba, Danny Kaye doing all that, because he was a wonderful vocal impressionist. So, Rumpelstiltskin and beautiful stories like, which turned out to be by Oscar Wilde. Funny that, the Selfish Giant and the Happy Prince, two of the most beautiful stories
I know, I love the Happy
in the
Prince.
world. And deeply moving, very Christian. Not that I knew that.
Yes, no, time. Absolutely, yeah.
But of course, and then in my late teens, Mum bought me one Christmas the complete works of Oscar Wilde, which included all his short stories. And I thought, my God, it was because these stories were never attributed on the request session. It was just, now we're going to listen to The Selfish Giant, and one heard it a million times over the years. It was never by Oscar Wilde.
Yeah.
So to discover in my teens, by which stage I knew Lady Chatterley Slover, I knew Lady Windermere's fan and the importance of being earnest.
Yes.
And to discover that The Selfish Giant and The Happy Prince were also by Oscar, I thought that explains it. If there's the testament to don't underestimate the quality of good literature for children, because there were stupid stories like Flick the Fire Engine, silly little ones. But there were these great things that I didn't quite grasp. I mean, all the Christian imagery one doesn't grasp at that age, but it resonated so deeply. They were so moving. So to discover, because they were written by a great writer,
Yeah.
There you are. But now the ones that stay with you. And I defy anyone to read The Happy Prince and not weep, because it's the most beautiful story of somebody being utterly selfless and saying, to the swallows, strip me bare of all my finery because I see all these people in greater need. Until, of course, eventually the statue was torn down because it looked so ugly.
I know, and the final little paragraph about it,
One day, God said,
God was saying,
one of his angels, bring me the two most precious things in the city.
The sparrow and his heart.
The dead sparrow and the heart, which had cracked inside the statue. Yes, that's right.
Makes you weep already anyway.
Yeah.
Like it's
I know.
Simple. It's so simple, Like, but it's sort of a testament, I think, obviously for you to be able to say that you still recall those stories so vividly. I think, yes, of course, testament to whoever was narrating that for you at that time on live radio or whatever. Yeah. Testament to the fact that they, had a very bloody good script to work with, sure. But you also have to have a bloody good voice to pull off that sort of thing and not come across as like over sentimental, as, right. I mean, you can also sound condescending when you do that sort of material. You know what I mean? Like, or you can sound preachy, it's interesting.
I tell you who it was who did the, I recognized, obviously later when I got to, I recognized the voice of the narrator of The Happy Prince. It was Bing Crosby.
Really?
Bing Crosby.
Of course it was. Wow. Gosh, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Little swallow, I don't know who did The Selfish Giant. And there was also The Snow Goose. Anyway, so radio drama. So I loved radio drama. Yeah. And so here I am as about a sort of 19, 20-year-old maybe. I'm doing my music degree at Victoria University and acting in the amateur theatre. But I do an audition for Radio New Zealand, or whatever it was called then, for radio drama with a guy called Fergus Dick, who was one of the main directors of radio drama in Wellington, because, of course, there were studios also in Christchurch and Dunedin. And I got in. And that's how I not only got experience behind a microphone, continued to gain fluency in reading scripts live, recording live.
Yeah, sight reading,
which of course we have to have. And I think I wasn't good at much at school, but by God, I got words, so I could read well above my age level. I knew I had that, whatever. And if you don't already have that, we have to acquire that as actors,
Yes, no,
it's
for
like
sure.
a voice. You have to acquire fluency and all sorts of things, and we have to acquire good reading ability. So anyway, so that wasn't a problem. But of course, it meant that I was there working with these people. I thought, my God, the leaders of the theatre in Wellington. There was Stuart Deviney and the late Ray Henwood and Ross Jolly, the people who went on to, had just founded Circa Theatre. Of course,
Oh, yes. Yeah, nice.
They had just founded Circa a couple of years before, and of course were the main actors at Downstage. And the late, sadly, Peter Vere-Jones, who just died last year, and a beautiful voice, a wonderful radio actor from an older generation named Alan Jarvis, who had a great voice, and Bruce Phillips. So these people I've now known for decades, but I met them all then, and I was in awe of them, and I learned some stuff, and they paid really well. My God. And we always had a rehearsal day on a Monday. They paid you just to rehearse. And we'd traipse into the bowels of Bowen House, the late lamented recording studios, which they pulled down in the 90s to extend Parliament. They destroyed these subterranean studios with beautiful heavy parquet flooring, perfect sound studios. It was a criminal. I remember Dame Kate Harcourt being at the spearhead of the group to save the studio.
It's laughable. It just pisses you right off.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So I fall in with the radio crowd. So I'm at Vic. I'm doing my music degree, amateur theatre, but getting my first professional gigs, which is as a radio actor, with the best of the best in Wellington, the professional actors.
Yeah.
And from that, in 1980, the late Ray Henwood, who died a couple of years ago, offered me a role in a new play at Circa, a New Zealand play by Geoffrey Thomas called Playing the Game. And so that was my professional debut 41 years ago at Circa on its original site, Harris Street, Old Circa. Tiny little 100-seat theatre, which was such an exciting space then.
Yeah.
God, it was exciting. Did you ever go there? You're too young. You weren't.
Well, I mean, I studied down in Wellington, but I was there 2007 to 9. And I mean, it was still quite an exciting space. But before
even the new space by Te Papa, you mean? Yes, of course, you would have only known the new circuit by Te Papa.
Yes, only the new one, yeah.
Yes, I forget when they moved. Was it? Oh, no, they were already in there in the late 90s when I briefly moved back to Wellington for a couple of years before moving to Auckland. Oh, so it must have gone by the early 90s or something, early or mid-90s, maybe they built the second theatre.
I was very, very aware that there was a vast and sort of long history of Wellington theatre, like just theatre buildings, theatre venues, structures that have been used theatrically, et cetera, et cetera. Being someone that went there in the kind of early, mid 2000s, you definitely turn up and you can sense that there's a historical politic, and especially any of the older actors that still reside there. If you do get the chance to speak with them or, the blessing of working with them, then you sort of get a chance to hear a little bit about that. It is definitely a feeling, I think, that we lack, or that is slightly different in that sort of scene in Auckland, I think. And I suppose it was also slightly different in the sound scene as well up here, like anyone that was working in any sense with voiceovers and anywhere with radio work or anything like that. I'm sure that there was a slightly different buzz or vibe going on in Auckland than there was in Wellington.
Do you think? I don't know.
Well, do you find it quite different between Wellington and Auckland now? In terms of work and in terms of the sort of vibe of, or like accessibility of theatre and arts and performing opportunities for young actors and things like that?
Wellington was very proud of the fact that it was regarded as the performance art capital. Yeah,
totally.
And it was, but it ain't any longer.
Well, no, it's not, but it definitely still has that feel, though, like it definitely, you're very aware that you're treading on boards or on ground that some of the greats in terms of our, acting or like theatrical acting community have sort of trained on or have worked on. It's kind of a cool thing.
There are, notable actors in Auckland too. I mean, I've lived here for 21 years now. I moved here just before the turn of the century. So 22 years. So I haven't worked in Wellington since. I did my one-man show, Tick Tick, there 10 years ago, briefly. But apart from that, the only theatres I've gone back to compare, in fact, are all the others, the Court in Christchurch, of which I'm an associate, and the Fortune in Dunedin, which is now sadly gone, and even Centrepoint in Palmerston North. But I've never worked in Wellington. I mean, nobody worked. The Downstage is a mausoleum now. I can't tell you how exciting it was when... So I did a few plays there, and that my first years in the biz there in the early 80s, I did some plays there, and God, it was exciting. It was so exciting. I was just tremulous with excitement when that hallowed space. It's such a shame now because it's just deadly. It's just, and
it's such a shame, eh?
It's not used anymore. Yeah. So at the centre of theatrical stuff had moved to Auckland.
Do you think that all of that sort of experience in a theatrical environment and all of the sort of, you have to develop such emotional, like vocally emotional athleticism, you have to develop the technical skills required to be able to sometimes project to an audience of 1,200 and sometimes 12, and any number in between, really, depending on what you're doing. Do you think that sort of experience has aided or assisted or made you a better narrator or a better vocal performer when it comes to being just behind a microphone?
The theatre experience?
Yeah.
I guess so. Yes, absolutely.
I think probably one of the biggest things that is quite obvious with your voice particularly, or any voice that I would consider it slightly more classical, is the care taken around enunciation and articulation. In theatre, you have to be so on form with that in such a muscular way, Yeah. And it's kind of no different right behind a microphone in a lot of ways, No,
that's right. But the theatre is about the voice. Well, obviously the microphone is too, because there's only the voice, literally. But the theatre, compared to film and telly, we say the theatre is the predominant means of expression is the voice.
Yeah.
Especially in a big theatre. And you can't do teleacting. You can't go mumble. There isn't a mic dangling above your head. And my God, something that my generation of actors has seen. It's funny, on the one hand, as the younger generations of actors get as much, if not more, experience as actors in this country in film or television than my generation had, because there was bugger all of it back then.
Yeah.
We may have had the theatrical experience because that's all there was predominantly. But now, so on the one hand, they get greater experience in film and television, but one noted with alarm, then if they were in a theatre, a complete inability to project their voice beyond the edge of the stage.
Yeah, totally.
And still use it as if they were mic'd. And you think, you can't do that now, sorry.
Yeah.
Just as people like me especially, I'm much happier in a big space. I've always been just big and loud.
Yeah.
And just as I had to learn, and I'm still not comfortable behind a camera, it still freezes me. And I always envy those people, particularly younger ones, who they had that naturalism. Yeah, and it may be because they didn't have to modify any larger theatrical technique, so it was easier for them to be real. And it's funny. But on the other hand, as I say, I also think, well, if you're then going to be in the theatre, you've really got to learn to do more with your voice. You can't rely on that little muttered, because it doesn't carry any, not only is it inaudible, it is inexpressible.
Yeah.
Using this tiny little narrow conversational range. You can't do Chekhov or Shakespeare or anything.
Well, you can't do the job, which is essentially to move people, isn't it?
Yeah. And you can move them to laughter. It doesn't just mean move them to tears, even moving them to laughter.
Oh, yeah, no, of course. Just simply moving them or shifting them from the state that they were when they walked in. Any sense of movement generally will happen through sound or oral stuff when it comes to, the theatre, for me at least anyway, I think for most people. Yeah. So you've got some epic fortes such as accents and being able to switch between accents really, really sort of swiftly and easily, and doing all of those accent switches really credibly as well. Do you have any kind of like horror stories or any sort of projects or books that you've had to record that were particularly challenging in that regard, you know?
Oh, I do.
Given all of your fortes that you have.
Yeah, I do actually. I tend to now do non-fiction. I don't recall asking to do it. I'm actually very happy to do. Yeah. I think, oh God, I'm too tired to do all those voices now. Did I really do all those voices? Because when I look back, the year I won, and I was so chuffed, I was voted Narrator of the Year. You know, there's actually a cup floating around Sunday with names engraved.
Well, yeah, so they don't do that anymore, do they?
They don't just realise they don't do it anymore.
The old Merv Smith.
Parnell, yes. There were photos of winners, George Henare, and
yes, there was Merv Smith there
Smith
too,
and me with Judith Tizard when I was presented with mime. Yes. I won it in 2005, and that year, as a result of, I imagine in particular, I did 2 back-to-back Wilbur Smiths. Now, Wilbur Smith is a South African, hugely successful, massively mega-selling, squillinty $1 million.
He's next level. Yeah.
Swashbuckly, sex and blood and gore and on the high sea. And he wrote this series of novels of a family over generations, over like 200 years. And I did one of them, and set in the 18th century. But it required about maybe 80, 90, 100 different voices. And I said to, I did it with Helen Marnie, our wonderful Helen, producer at the time. I said, I'm going to do voices. She said, all right, darling. And so I started a list of
famous last words
as little mnemonics to remember who. Yes, because there was Cornish of various generations, and South African, and even Hottentot.
Hottentot? What's that?
Hottentot, the African.
Yes.
There's another word for it. It's a bit like, I don't think you're allowed to say Hottentot anymore. It's a bit like calling Inuit Eskimo. It's become you shouldn't say Hottentot, but I forget what their tribe is called. But they speak with clicks.
I see. Awesome.
There are some.
Yeah.
Anyway, so
interesting. Interesting to have to do that.
Yes.
And to have to learn.
Yeah. Well, I thought, I don't know how we knew. We knew about, maybe she was the one who knew about. She said, oh, Hottentot, that's the one that uses clicks. And we did a little bit of research, and I said, oh, so his name was spelled Xia, but it was Ja. So I would do the click. And
wow.
But anyway, I had to do a million different accents and different ages and different sexes, of course, because you have to be male and female.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
You as a woman know you also have to do male voices, and it's quite possible just to adjust the pitch slightly. And but I win accents and all, and those that book was 400 pages long, and it was a huge success. And then I did a second one. There was, I think, demand for it. And so I did the sequel, the next one in the series, which was those 2 books took me about 4 or 5 months to do because they were just massive.
Yeah.
I literally spent half a year, as I recall. Anyway, but I had some wonderful, there happened to be an open day, which they had like once a year back in those days. And I was, we were there.
Is that when like members can come in, or is that when
members can come? And there was there was a number of particularly older men who say, oh, Paul, here's somebody else who wants to meet you. He heard the Wilbur Smith books. And then my hand was being pumped by these men saying, oh, thank you for it was so thrilling. And and I'd never heard any we got the odd letter occasionally, the odd thank you note, which was lovely. But it was just lovely to be reminded, because of course what we do is literally in a little box in a room, and then we know it goes out there. But to actually get that feedback was
for
just
sure
wonderful. I thought, that's right, people actually do hear these books we do, and and that was greatly chuffed.
Yeah, no, totally.
The audience, but I mean, hearing feedback from a talking book was really lovely. So that was great.
The next question kind of follows along kind of organically. What does doing the job mean to you, or what does assuming the role of a narrator kind of mean to you after all these years that you've been doing it? How long have you been
Well, 20 years. As soon as I moved
20,
to Auckland,
yeah.
I knew
Gosh.
about the Blind Foundation.
Yeah.
And I also did a lot of commercial voice work then, which paid a hell of a lot better. I don't get that anymore now. The phone stopped ringing. I've lost my number.
What do you think that is? Like, why
I was lamenting about that with our dear colleague John Callan today during my coffee break this morning at the studios. I mean, our voices just, speaking of my accent, they want a more Kiwi sound now.
Yeah.
And our voices are
course.
older, you know, because other colleagues of my generation also said, where's the voice work gone? And John, who's 10 years older, saying, well, apart from the odd sort of, you know, they want the odd posh one. And our voices sound a bit too finished now. They like more Kiwi, more. It's the evolution of becoming more and more as we should. You know?
Yeah, totally.
That's fine. But I mean, it's our loss. But I mean, and anyway, I mean, I'm sure when I was in my peak period, when I moved here and I was about 40, I did huge amounts. And I'm sure there was a disgruntled 64-year-old saying, where's my voice work going? Because, you know, next generation had come along, you know, like me and others of my age. So it's just an age thing. You just have to move aside gracefully and say, oh, well, you know, now you're the old dude. And they say, yeah, we know that voice. Or, yeah, those voices are sounding old and tired. We want young, fresh, new, more Kiwi.
Yeah.
That's what they're using.
And then the trend changes, and thus here we are.
So anyway, so that was about the commercial work. So that's gone now. So that's been a bit of a hole in the old income. It was a regular. I mean, you know, you still get a lot of it because you're good. You're on your strap. But I've had my time in the sun, and one's had to, you know, put one's big boy pants on and say, oh, well, I had a great run, and I did for about 25 years.
Oh, totally.
It's gone now.
Well, I don't know. I believe that, you know, you still have a highly veritable career that's still continuing and extending every novel that we complete at Blind Foundation. Well, sorry, at Blind Foundation NZ,
but
you know.
I mean, you know, but it's
in terms of that other side of career, though, sure, I completely understand.
I mean, it's still immensely satisfying, and I love it. But of course, it's nowhere near as well paid as commercial work, and you know.
But it is an incredibly satisfying and rewarding job.
Oh yes. I mean, all that's obviously taken for granted. If it was just for the money, one wouldn't bother because
absolutely.
It's not much of it. I mean, people might not know, but you know, it's not a 40-hour-a-week job. No narrator does or can do 40 hours of recording a week. So we just do, you know, several 2 or 3 hour sessions a week. And that's usually about as much as, you know, well, that's literally all there is time to do, given the number of narrators and only a handful of studios. So it's not as if we can earn our living solely by doing this. So, of course, the aspect of doing it as a community service still has to be very strong in us.
Yeah, totally. I think as well, though, you know, we largely do a lot of New Zealand titles and things, but on the sort of global sphere, you know, I don't know if there are any Kiwi narrators on Audible or that are narrating through Audible. You know, from what I understand, their sort of deals for their voices are remarkably shallow and sieve-like. It's an interesting one. I just did want to bring up one last wee thing. So obviously, I think in episode 1, I brought up the fact that Caedmon Records, or the two sort of babes that I like to call them, who kind of sort of launched Caedmon Records and made it a sort of prominent player in the audiobook industry, when they chased Dylan Thomas out of the 92nd Street YMCA in 1952 and cornered him, saying, please, for the love of everything, can you come with us and narrate your poetry? Can we make an LP? That'd be great. So I've got a wee example of Dylan Thomas. Actually, it's one of the first. It wasn't the first, but one of the first, which is, do not go gentle into that good night.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Though wise men at their end know dark is right, because their words had forked no lightning, they do not go gentle into that good night. Good men the last wave by, crying how bright their frail deeds might have danced in a green bay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. Wild men who caught and sang the sun in flight and learn too late they grieved it on its way. Do not go gentle into that good night. Grave men near death, who see with blinding sight, blind eyes could blaze like meteors and be gay. Rage, rage against the dying of the light. And you, my father, there on the sad height, curse, bless me now with your fierce tears, I pray. Do not go gentle into that good night. Rage, rage against the dying of the light.
There was a little connection that you had with Dylan Thomas, though, when it came to audio narration as well, which I kind of wanted to draw a link to. Do you want to tell us about that?
Well, I've done in the theatre Dylan Thomas's great play for voices, as he called it, describing a little Welsh fishing village back in the 40s or something, and it's his great opus, and he wrote it for radio. It's called A Play for Voices, and it has 2 narrators and then characters. And I've done that play twice. The first one I did in Auckland, and then the second one I did at the Court Theatre in Christchurch. When I did the silo production about 15, 14 something years ago, we did it as if it was a 1950s studio. And so the audience came in and we were dressed in 50s, very loose trousers and jackets. And we all sat on chairs and we got up and stood up at microphones, just as we did in the days of doing radio plays. And there was somebody there on an effects table, the Foley table.
Wow.
And it was lovely. And it was a lovely idea. Caroline Bell Booth directed that.
Ah, nice.
And then I did it in a semi-staged. I mean, it really is, just a play to listen to. Action is described, and so my dear friend and colleague Geraldine Brophy was asked to direct a production, a sort of stage production at the Court in Christchurch, and so that was about 10 years later. So I went down about a decade ago and did it again playing voice one of the 2 narrators, doing the long opening, which describes this town waking up. It starts before dawn with the famous first line of the play is, "To begin at the beginning." Night, it says, and then on it goes, and it's still, and gradually there's the twinkling of dawn on the harbour, and the first person coming into the street, and the cat sort of slinking around the neighbourhood, and it's utterly enchanting. So to find that, it's been a real treat. Yeah.
Oh, that's so awesome.
It's a shame we don't do radio plays anymore, Romy.
I know. Or even just doing, multi-voice books, to be honest. I mean,
well, that's right.
There are enough books that have enough dialogue or different mindset or viewpoint descriptions and things like that,
Oh, I tell you what, I did one. I've met a few famous people in my time, but there is one book. On one occasion did the Blind Foundation make an exception and say, we want you to share a reading of a book, because the book is in a female voice and a male voice, and the author is a celebrated New Zealand actress, Barbara Ewing, who's been in England for about 40 years. She was in a very famous series called Brass in the 80s.
Yeah, no, I've read a few of her books, I think.
The actress, or the actresses, one about the actresses. This one was about the great British painters, Turner and all those people in 18th century London.
Oh, nice.
And Gainsborough and all that.
God, she's good.
And half of it was written in her voice. And Helen, that producer, said, I've chosen you to be the male voice. And she's in New Zealand. She comes back every few years. And she's recorded her half. You don't get to work together, but she's recorded her half. And I want you to do your half. And then Helen said, I've arranged for us to have drinkies and a little lunch. And so...
Nice.
We went to that lovely little place down behind the old studios, that lovely garden.
Foundation on George?
On George.
Yeah.
And I was so awestruck. I said, I'm so starstruck to meet you. I said, my mum and I used to love Brass in the 80s, where she played this voluptuous woman with gorgeous tits that used to entice Timothy what's that wonderful actor name? Prunella Scales and Timothy West. Timothy West played this lustful boss who found every excuse to come across and gaze at her gorgeous breasts, sweaty breasts. She pounded. She was a working class woman, and he was the boss of the manor. Anyway, so it was wonderful to actually meet her. And she was the most enchanting, wonderful woman. And then apparently she was thrilled with the work I did for her. We heard back from London, so I was really
yeah. She wanted to narrate her own book. Theo from Audiobooks NZ was put in charge of making sure that the recording got done. She wanted to do it herself, over lockdown, and she was absolutely baffled and shocked to hear that she was being asked to sit in her wardrobe for a while or under a duvet to be able to read and narrate it without any interference with the sound, which I find kind of hilarious to think about. As little old Barbara Ewing just perching in her wardrobe, or just being left with all of her beautiful coats around, going, "Fuck this," Where's my studio, you bastards?
That's right.
I love it. Anyway, well, I'm very mindful of times. We'll finish up there, but thank you so much for your time, Paul. Thank you very, very much for coming back with us, and no doubt we will have some more nice conversation topics to bring you back on for eventually at a later date, no doubt.
Sure. Bye.
Thanks a lot for joining us. I'm Romy Hooper. You've been listening to Sound Salad, for all things spoken and all things heard. To hear more Sound Salad episodes, go to www.soundsalad.co.nz. This has been brought to you by my gold sponsor, Audiobooks NZ. Check out their library at www.audiobooksnz.co.nz.
We hope that you will have a pleasant journey, and if we can add to your comfort in any way, please do not hesitate to press the call bell.